John McMullen from 97.3 ESPN.com. You can check out his national NFL coverage at FanRag Sports NFL and at JF McMullen on Twitter. He joins us now with a look at the Eagles' moves first here, John, where a sneaky little move here. Chris Long, 32 today. His birthday's today. He kind of replaces Connor Barwin, but seems like a better fit than Barwin was in this Eagle defense.
Yeah, happy birthday, Chris Long. That's a nice little gift, $2.4 million on your birthday. So at 32 years old, that's a pretty good deal. And you're right, he's going to be the replacement for Connor Barwin in a couple of ways. He's considered a good locker room guy, as Connor was, sort of a leader. So I think that's part of it. And he fits into the rotation at defensive end with Brandon Graham and Vinny Curry. And he is a defensive end, unlike Connor, who was more of a glorified 3-4 linebacker making the move. And this guy is obviously a traditional 4-3 defensive end that has played that position his entire career and pretty successfully. You know, we're talking about a guy who was way back in the day the number 2 overall pick. So he had a lot of talent. He's not that type of player any longer, obviously, but he was a key contributor to a Super Bowl winning team. So that tells you he can still help.
Yeah, and the question is, he played 60% of the snaps in New England last year. Here, Vinny Curry played 40% of the snaps. Is there a natural split there between those two? Do you see him having more of a role, more of a situational role? What do you see a guy like Chris Long's role being in Jim Schwartz's defense?
Well, we'll have to see how it shakes out. I would imagine they want to get Vinny involved more than he was last season when Connor was here. Obviously, they signed him to a big money extension. Didn't play nearly as well as they thought he would. And I think there's still hope that he's able to take that step forward and become the second guy in the rotation with Brandon Graham, and then have Chris Long kind of fit in behind there. And then you have some of the younger guys fighting. But I think if you look at Jim Schwartz's history, he would prefer to go with more of a rotation than he was able to do last season. I think he played the key guys, specifically Barwin and Graham, more than he wanted to. I think he would prefer to have more guys involved, getting more reps, because that makes them fresher for the fourth quarter when you need that pass rush. So I think the ultimate goal is to get 4 guys that can really get each, both defensive end and defensive tackle. So you have an 8-man rotation, and everybody's fresh at all times. That's the ultimate goal.
One thing with Long, too, seemingly can move up and down the line, something they couldn't do with Barwin.
No, certainly not. As I said, he's more of a traditional defensive end, and he can play both sides. He's more comfortable on the right side. That's also a fit since Brandon's on the left side. And he could even move him inside at times, although I doubt the Eagles would go that route. But certainly he's more equipped physically. And as I said, he's a legit defensive lineman. He's not sort of a blown-up linebacker trying to hold up on the edge, which Connor had difficulties with at times, especially when he was playing big-time left tackles like Trent Williams, for instance. He really struggled with. Chris Long is certainly more equipped, even at his advancing age, to do things like that.
John McMullen with us. John, the NFL draft not that far away. So how about defensive end at 14? Would this mean that they wouldn't look to go in that direction, seeing that he got a 2-year deal, maybe hold off on defensive end, at least for this offseason in the draft?
Yeah, I mean, Howie Roseman said today, no, not necessarily. This is not going to impact, and Joe Douglas as well, the draft plan. And there's been some, at least, whispers that the Eagles are looking at edge player at 14. But I do think it will at least somewhat at least, not force them to go there and maybe jump at a player that isn't necessarily worthy of going. I think it gives you a little bit more comfort to know you have a player that's going to be able to help, and he's not a long-term fix, obviously. But when you're not desperate at a certain position, it gives you a little more rope, and the more positions you're not desperate at, the better, because the ultimate way everyone wants to go and everyone talks about it, and it's always a cliche, best player available, but that's unrealistic. And the Eagles have done a good job now at wide receiver and defensive end, bringing in veteran guys to where you don't see that enormous need. The one position they haven't been able to address is cornerback. And we always talk about how deep that position is, but it's getting less and less deep every day. We've already had 2 injuries from projected first-round picks that are going to knock them out. And now we got Tabor down in Florida running a 4.7. So all of a sudden, these cornerbacks, which is the biggest need for the Eagles, it's not looking nearly as deep as it once did.
How about this move, John? Does it make them better defensively than they were last year on the defensive line?
I think it does from the standpoint that he is. He's, as I said, he's a legitimate defensive end, and Connor was playing out of position. He was very professional, and he did his job, and he didn't complain. But he was not only, I think a lot of people don't realize, not only was he making the transition from outside linebacker to defensive end, but he also switched sides. He was traditionally a strong side player, and the Eagles moved him over to the weak side on the right defensive end. So he had not only issues with being sort of a square peg, but for a number of reasons. And he did not play well last season. That's just the way it was. Connor Barwin, and he played a lot. So I think when you look at Chris Long, again, it's a Band-Aid. It's not a long-term fix. But I think for the short term, I think, it makes him a little bit better football team.
So are the Eagles done shopping, or are there more pieces still to add in free agency?
Well, Howie Roseman said there's a couple players that they're surprised they're still on the market. So there's always a chance you'll see these kind of value signings, maybe another 1 or 2, but I couldn't imagine much more than that. And I wouldn't even guarantee they're going to sign another player in free agency because obviously they're up against it from a salary cap standpoint, but we constantly say that, and Howie's a whiz sort of juggling the numbers. So that's probably not the issue. But the cupboard's basically bare. I still look at that cornerback position and say, even if you carpet bomb it in the draft and bring in, say, 3 different cornerbacks, I still think you need a veteran body there. So if there's some way, whether somebody remains on the market or they can work a trade, I still think they need some kind of veteran presence at the cornerback position.
Talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. And, of course, you can check out all his national NFL coverage at FanRag Sports NFL at JF McMullen on Twitter. The one thing with Chris Long, too, is much like Barwin, he brings a presence in that locker room, something that people were concerned about losing Barwin. So they kind of replaced that aspect of, the defense as well.
Yeah, he is, and that's what I mentioned. He's considered a locker room leader, and obviously his father went to Villanova, so they have some history with the city.
And once threw Pete Thompson off the golf course.
Yeah, Howie Long threw me off the course almost. He wanted to kill me.
And his father's a Hall of Fame player, too, so a Hall of Fame football player from Villanova. You generally don't hear that, but Yeah, I mean he's always been considered as sort of a locker room leader, both in St. Louis and even last season in New England. And there is a concern because Connor, that was the one thing. I mean, the Eagles were trying to work out a deal with Connor Barwin where it would take less money to come back. And to be honest, from a football standpoint, they shouldn't have been because he's just not a fit for this defense. And he didn't play well, as I mentioned last season. But they valued him so much because of not only what he brought to that locker room, but also of what he meant to the community that they wanted him back. And it speaks to him as a person, and it speaks to how much, as I said, they valued it. And so to get a guy who's considered a leader is a big part of it.
Yeah, and one thing for sure, too, I'm interested to get your take on, Curry's there. They bring in Long, and maybe Long is not an every snap player. So does that say that they either, have something in store for a guy like Marcus Smith or more for Steven Means?
Well, I've always thought, and I still think, Jim Schwartz likes Marcus Smith, and it doesn't. He hasn't been shy about it, really. He thinks he does have potential, and I know that's shocking for some of the fan base. But I thought he was an ill fit for the old defense, the old 3-4, and I think he does fit in better as just a pass rusher in Jim's scheme. So I think a second year in that program, in that scheme, could help Marcus Smith. And I still think there's hope for them. And then there's also Alex McAllister more than I think Steven Means. I think Steven, it's going to be similar to last season. I mean, if he does make the team, he's going to be the 51st or 52nd or 53rd guy. He's going to be a deep reserve. I think for people who don't remember Alex McAllister, he was a draft choice last year, and he's basically a 6'6" guy who looks like a wide receiver, weighs 240 pounds, looks like Dorial Green Beckham body-wise, and he's playing defensive end. So the Eagles kind of stashed him on injured reserve, hoping he could gain weight, and we'll see. When April 17th rolls around, if this guy gained 20 or 25 pounds, he's got the wingspan to be a terror on the outside, and I think that was the hope when they drafted him, to get him in the program. Hopefully he could get stronger and gain weight, and we'll see how that works out.
Yeah, and as you write at 97.3ESPN.com, the Eagles addressed some defense today with Chris Long. That means that obviously that they felt that defensive end, they needed to get at least something more there. We'll see if they target that spot at 14 in the draft. Right now, 14 in the draft, what's your list in terms of need at 14?
Well, the obviously first need on this team is cornerback. Second need is cornerback. Third need is cornerback. I mean, now that they've addressed defensive end at least somewhat with Chris Long, now that they've addressed wide receiver with Alshon Jeffrey and Torrey Smith, it's not to say they don't need to add bodies. I certainly think they're going to add another edge defender at some point in the draft, but it's not as glaring as the cornerback position. I mean, right now, the starting cornerbacks on this team are Jalen Mills and C.J. Smith. And the nickel corner would be Ron Brooks, but I don't even know if he's healthy enough to play. So it's a bad situation. And that's why I bring up sort of the veteran part of it, because even if you do get talented guys, because of the way the NFL plays, and it's really, really difficult for cornerbacks to make the transition. And even guys like, say, Marcus Peters in Kansas City, who's a heck of a player and pretty much hit the ground running as a first-round pick a couple of years ago. But if you watch him play, it's big play, big play, big play, penalty, penalty, penalty. I mean, these guys have a really, really difficult time because they're allowed to get away with more at the college level. All of a sudden they get to the pros, and you got these ticky-tack illegal contacts and holding down the field. And some of the guys, Darquez Denard, the Michigan State corners, Trey Waynes, those guys were phenomenal in college, and they just get flags all the time, and they can't stay on the field. So this Eagles team has to address that position from multiple fronts, and they not only have to get talent and young talent, but they have to get some kind of veteran presence.
So it sounds like you're subscribing to Mike Gill's theory for the draft, John. Corner. You're on board with that.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've been saying that for a while. They have to carpet bomb that position. They just do. I mean, there's no other way to look at it. You can't go into a season with, as I said, Jalen Mills and C.J. Smith. I mean, you're going to get killed in a passing league, and you just have to up the talent level. And the problem is, you have Sidney Jones, who would have been a perfect fit at 14, probably is right in there as far as when you rank the prospects from 1 to 50 or wherever you have them. He would have been right in that range, in the 14 to 18 range, and he tears his Achilles at his pro day. So he's out of the equation. And then you have the kid from UCLA who tore his pectoral. He's out of the equation. And as I said, Jalen Tabor today at Florida's pro day ran a 4.7. Well, you can't play cornerback in this league running a 4.7. So all of a sudden,
you can if you're Kerry Williams.
Well, I should have said you can't play effectively.
All right.
4.7.
Bradley Fletcher would disagree with you.
Yeah. And so some of these guys, you know, there's this whole cottage industry, you know this, Mike, of you know, scouts who watch film and sort of self-made, and then the draft has become this huge thing. But they all, you know, pretty much say the same thing, and it's everybody's great, everybody's great, everybody's great. And then they get on the field and you go, this guy's not that great. So I'm really, really concerned about the Eagles in that particular position. So whether, yeah, I mean, they have to add multiple bodies in the draft, but they also have to work out a trade or bring in an Alteron Burner or somebody like that. Somebody who knows
there's a report out there right now, Jimmy Kempsky, that they're interested in Patrick Robinson, who was kind of a flop in New England. He was all sorts of injuries.
It's more of a fact that he knows how to play NFL football, and you have to get that across to the younger guys, because as I said, there is such a drastic change from the college to the pro level as far as how they call the game. Really, really good corners at college. And I bring up Peters because he was really good right away in the NFL. They tend to be very physical at the college level, and they're allowed to get away with it. They're allowed to be physical. They're allowed to beat up wide receivers. And they get to the pros, and you have some guys like Peters who are mentally tough enough that they can overcome all the penalties because they're constantly getting called for penalties and still make big plays. It's still going to frustrate you. And then there's other guys who just get so shell-shocked by the difference that it takes them years to even become competent players. So, yeah, Patrick Robinson might not get you excited, but they need that kind of player just to teach some of the young kids they're going to bring in.
What about Malcolm Butler, John? Would the Eagles have any interest in him? What's the latest on Malcolm Butler?
Well, yeah, they would love to get Malcolm Butler, but that's not possible. I mean, he's a restricted free agent.
Guys are kicking the tires on him, though, right? I mean, there are teams that are calling.
Yeah, the Saints. I mean, the Saints are There's some thought in the league that there's sort of a wink-wink deal when you talk about that Malcolm Butler is still part of the Brandon Cooks deal when that trade went down. As I said, because he's a restricted free agent, hasn't signed his tender, so you can't trade him. Now, what you can do if you're the Saints is you can sign him to an offer sheet, and the Patriots cannot match, and then you have to send your first-round pick. Now, the problem for the Saints is they have the 11th pick in the draft. So do you really want to send the 11th pick in the draft for Malcolm Butler? I don't think they want to do that. And the Eagles would certainly not want to send the 14th pick, which would that's what it would cost if they wanted to sign him to an offer sheet, even if they had the space, and they don't have the space. But, yeah, I mean, Malcolm Butler is a lockdown corner in this league, or at least if there is such a thing, he's as close as it gets, and he would be very, very advantageous from a football standpoint. But the Eagles aren't in a position to make that happen.
And Derek Gunn reporting the Eagles and Robinson, Jason Lockenfora also confirming Patrick Robinson a 1-year deal. Had a good year. What with the Chargers was he in 15? He was with the Saints. He was with the Saints and the Chargers, and then Grigson brought him in. I remember the Colts signing him, and he was really supposed to be a big signing in that defensive backfield last year. He was injured a lot. He's very Leotis McKelvin-ish with the injuries back there.
Yeah, and very much like Leotis McKelvin, Patrick Robinson is right now the Eagles' best cornerback. So although he's not a star by any stretch of the imagination, that is a signing that makes a ton of sense, and it's a signing I've been waiting for because I've been saying on this show for weeks that they need a veteran presence at cornerback.
All right, John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. I'm sure we'll have more on that, of course, and, of course, at JF McMullen on all things NFL. Jeff Lurie, by the way, speaks tonight. What do you want to hear?
Well, I mean, there's not much really that you're going to hear new from Jeffrey Lurie. I think, from a national standpoint, I think every owner has to answer the question about the Raiders first and foremost, and about this league continuing to allow teams to relocate. And it's pretty clear to draw a direct line to the fact that Jeffrey Lurie gets $53 million by letting the Raiders move. So that's a question you have to answer. As far as the Eagles, I imagine he's just going to reinforce what Howie Roseman has consistently said during the offseason, that this organization right now is moving forward with one goal, and that's to maximize the potential of Carson Wentz as a franchise quarterback.
All right, John, we'll have more on the NFL, of course, tomorrow at this time, 97.3 ESPN, and John McMullen here as the Eagles get ready for the NFL Draft next up on the agenda. And today they signed 2 players on defense, Chris Long and Patrick Robinson. More on that still to come. Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, guys.